Have you ever stopped to think about where core Christian beliefs actually came from? You know, they weren't just handed down fully formed. Instead, they were hammered out piece by piece in the fire of intense debate over hundreds and hundreds of years. Today, we're diving into the ancient documents that literally define the faith, often in moments of major crisis. All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to start way back with the early church as they wrestled with defining God in Christ. Then we'll leap forward to the Reformation and its explosive debates over salvation. And finally, we'll see how all these ideas got organized into a system to shape the faith for generations. And here's the key thing to watch for: how the reason for writing these documents changes over time. So let's just ask the obvious question right up front. Why should we care? I mean, really, why get tangled up in these ancient arguments over specific words and phrases? What could they possibly mean for us today? Well, here's why. This wasn't just some dusty academic debate. These documents were battle standards, literally raised when the future of Christianity was hanging in the balance. These words define the very nature of God, the identity of Christ, and the path to salvation for billions of people. This isn't just history, it's the DNA of the faith. Okay, let's dive into our first section. The brand new early church was facing a massive foundational question: who exactly was Jesus Christ? And the first great crisis that really rocked the church to its foundations was a teaching called Arianism. Now, you have to understand, this was a wildly popular idea. It was spreading like wildfire. But it proposed something that struck right at the heart of the faith: the idea that Jesus Christ wasn't fully and eternally God in the same way God the Father was. And what's just fascinating is that this massive conflict really boiled down to one tiny difference in a single word. The Nicene Creed, the Orthodox response, insisted that Jesus is of the same substance, homoousios, as the Father. The Arians said no, he's of a similar substance, same versus similar, a single letter in Greek. But think about what's at stake. If Jesus is just a created being, even the most magnificent one, is he actually worthy of worship? Can he truly save humanity? The entire logic of Christianity hinged on this one idea. It was the difference between worshiping God himself or worshiping a creature. To make this even clearer, the church later developed the Athanasian Creed. This thing became the gold standard for explaining the Trinity. And this quote just captures its brilliant, mind-bending precision. One God, three persons, you don't mix up the persons, and you don't chop up the substance of God. Wow. So you see, this creed wasn't some abstract document to be filed away in a library. No way. It was a practical, everyday tool. It was used in worship services, it set the standard for what was taught from the pulpit, it was a clear line in the sand against wrong ideas, and it beautifully laid out that Jesus is both fully God and fully man. It made the mystery of the Trinity something the average person could grasp. Okay, now let's fast forward several hundred years. A totally new firestorm is brewing. The central debate shifts from who God is to a question that's maybe even more personal. How is a person saved? This, my friends, was the spark that ignited the Protestant Reformation. And this era saw an absolute explosion of theological writing. You had documents like the Belgic Confession, written to draw a clear line around what these new Reformed churches believed. You had the Heidelberg Catechism, created specifically to teach these core ideas to kids. And then, in 1618, things got so heated that an international church council had to be called to deal with a new challenge from within. And that challenge was something called Arminianism. It started from inside the Reformed Church, which made it so contentious. It began questioning some really core teachings about grace, about free will, and about God's ultimate control and salvation. It created a deep, painful rift in the church. So the followers of a theologian named Arminius put forward these 5 key ideas. Basically, they were arguing that God chooses people because he looks into the future and sees that they will choose to have faith. They said Christ died for every single person without exception, and that ultimately humans had the ability to either accept or reject God's offer of grace. And, maybe most controversially, they said a true believer could even fall away and lose their salvation. Well, the big international meeting, the Synod of Dort, came back with a response that was incredibly swift and systematic. They didn't just say no. They wrote a detailed, point-by-point rebuttal called the Canons of Dort, and it has been a cornerstone of Reformed theology ever since. And this is where you can really see the point-counterpoint of the debate so clearly. Dort said no, God's choice is his own eternal decision. It's not based on him peeking into the future. They argued Christ's death was specifically intended to actually save the elect. They doubled down, saying humanity is so fallen they can't choose God on their own, that God's grace is ultimately irresistible for those he chooses, and that if you're a true believer, you will make it to the end because God himself will make sure of it. So, after all that defining and defending, the next big job was to take all these doctrines and build them into a coherent system, a system for teaching the faith to your kids and their kids after them. You see, the battlefield was shifting from these big councils to the family living room. The new question was, how do we pass on this rich, complex, hard-won theology? It wasn't just about winning arguments anymore. It was about shaping a culture, preserving a whole way of looking at the world. And the answer was a new kind of document, the Catechism. And the most famous of them all, the Westminster Larger Catechism from 1648, doesn't start with some dense theological point. It starts with this unbelievably profound question that gets to the very heart of what it means to be human. And there's the answer. The whole logic of the Catechism is that before you can understand anything else about God or the Bible or yourself, you have to know your ultimate purpose. And it's a dual purpose, to glorify God and to enjoy him forever. Now, what is so brilliant about this slide is the simple, elegant structure it lays out for the entire Christian faith. The Catechism basically argues that the whole Bible teaches just two fundamental things. First, what we are to believe about God, and second, what duty God requires from us. That's it. Theology first, then ethics. Belief, then behavior. This simple framework shaped how generations of families understood their place in the universe. So, let's pull all these threads together. We've just sprinted through more than 1,000 years of intense debate. What's the takeaway? What's the lasting legacy of this whole conversation? And why on earth do these ancient papers still matter? It really boils down to this. Each type of document played a totally distinct but vital role. The early creeds were all about defining the absolute non-negotiable basics. The Reformation confessions were there to defend key beliefs when they came under fire. And finally, the catechisms were designed to disciple, to take the whole system of faith and make it teachable for everyday life. And this is the deeply historical truth that these papers reveal. They aren't just a random collection of old documents. They are the living record of a continuous 1,500-year conversation where the Church, often under extreme pressure, hammered out its identity and put into words what it believes about the biggest questions we can ask. Just think about that for a second. Over 1,500 years. From the Council of Nicaea in the 300s all the way to the Westminster Assembly in the mid-1600s. It shows a faith that has been tested, argued over, refined, and then carefully passed down through the centuries. And that leaves us with one last big thought. All of these documents were forged in fire to answer the urgent questions of their day with absolute conviction. So it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What are the critical questions that our time is demanding we answer? And do we have the same courage to answer them with that kind of clarity and conviction?